What if the worst thing a critic can say about a movie is actually the best thing that can happen to its box office? It sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? But it's not. It's the new reality in Indian cinema. We're looking at a system that's so broken, critical hate has become a marketing tool. And we're about to show you exactly how it works.
Let's start with a number. Just soak this in. 670 crore. That's the global box office for a film called Dhurandhar. Look, by any financial metric you can possibly think of, this is a monster hit, an undeniable, certified blockbuster. But this is what one of India's top critics called it: a hateful, jingoist fantasy. Now, this isn't just a simple disagreement about the quality of the script or the editing. This is a moral judgment. This is a declaration of war. So what is going on here? How did we get this massive disconnect? Well, the answer is something called a trust deficit. It's a chasm that's been growing between critics and audiences, and it has turned the entire world of film reviews completely upside down.
So here's the bottom line. Our core argument for this whole explainer: the traditional film critic, as we know them, is broken. For a certain kind of blockbuster today, a one-star review isn't a problem, it's basically a marketing campaign. And stick around, because later I'm going to show you a shocking parallel from history where a huge Hollywood studio was caught literally inventing a fake critic to deal with this exact problem.
Now, to really get how we got here, we have to rewind the clock. Because this level of open hostility between critics and audiences, this is new. It's a radical break from how things used to be. Okay, so back in the early 2010s, you had what we can call the consensus era. Critics and audiences didn't always agree, but they were at least in the same ballpark. Then, 2019 happened. Kabir Singh happened. That was the watershed moment, the earthquake. And from 2020 on, we've been in the divergence era, complete and total separation. And it's the reason for the disagreement that's changed so dramatically. A decade ago, a critic might pan a movie like Dabangg for being illogical. It was a debate about taste, about aesthetics. Today, the fight is about morality. Critics are attacking films for their politics, for their values. It's not a question of good art versus bad art anymore. It's framed as a battle between good and evil. But if it's not just about taste, what is it really about? Well, if you look at the data, it seems to be about a hidden penalty system that critics are applying, maybe without even realizing it. We're calling it the ideological penalty. It's a quantifiable drop in a movie's rating, not because the cinematography is bad or the acting is wooden, but because the film's core message clashes with the worldview of the critical establishment. And this table right here illustrates the point perfectly. Take a film like Jawan. It has a secular, social justice message. It actually gets a 21-point bonus from critics compared to the audience score. But look at the others. Films with themes critics deem hyper-nationalist or hyper-masculine get slammed with a massive penalty. Gadar 2 gets hit with a 63-point penalty. The data is telling us that critics aren't just reviewing the film, they're grading its politics. So this creates a really fascinating dilemma, right? What happens when a filmmaker makes a technical masterpiece, a film that's just beautifully shot and edited, but uses all that skill to deliver a message that critics find completely repulsive? This brings us to what our source material calls a Trojan Horse film. It's a movie that uses the beautiful wrapping paper of prestige cinema, incredible cinematography, amazing sound design to smuggle in an ideological payload. And Animal is the textbook example. It's too well made to just be called trash, but its message is considered too toxic for most critics to even think about praising. Now contrast that with the nostalgia shield. This is where a movie like Gadar 2, which might have some clumsy editing or dated special effects, still becomes a massive blockbuster. Why? Because the audience's emotional connection to the original franchise is so strong that it acts like a protective shield, making all those technical flaws totally irrelevant. So you've got this completely dysfunctional system, but maybe the most bizarre, most ironic consequence of all this is that for certain films, a truly terrible review is now the best marketing money can buy. This is called the Contra-Indicator phenomenon. It's when an audience sees a critic who they already see as part of a disconnected elite, trashing a film for its politics, and that becomes a signal to go buy a ticket. The review basically screams, hey, this movie was not made for us, it was made for you. And that audience responds by showing up in huge numbers. I mean, just look at the numbers for Gadar 2. A pathetic 17% critic score. A domestic box office of almost 700 crore rupees. This isn't just a disconnect, it's a negative correlation. You could argue the worse the reviews got, the more fuel they poured on the fire. So the audience is caught. On the one hand, they don't trust the intellectual critics because they see them as politically biased. On the other hand, they don't trust the industry trade critics, often called samosa critics, because they believe their good reviews are just bought and paid for. So with nobody left to trust, word of mouth becomes the only currency that actually means anything.
And remember that historical parallel I mentioned? Well, if you think this is a new phenomenon, it's not. Back in 2001, Sony Pictures got so desperate for good reviews that they literally invented a fake critic named David Manning to write glowing quotes for their own movies. This battle to control a film's narrative isn't new at all. It's just that today, the audience has way more power.
All of this leads us to a huge, fundamental question. What is even the point of film criticism in this day and age?
And it really boils down to this. On one side, you have the argument that you have to separate the art from the ideology. Think Leni Riefenstahl's Nazi-era films. Horrific message, but they're still studied in film schools for their groundbreaking techniques. But on the other side, you have the critics who say, no, bad politics is bad art. They believe a film that promotes a hateful or simplistic message is, by its very definition, an artistic failure.
Actor Hrithik Roshan actually captured this tension perfectly. He came out and said he disagreed with the politics of Dhurandhar, but as a student of cinema, he couldn't deny its technical brilliance. And for that very nuanced take, he got attacked from both sides, which just proves how incredibly polarized this whole conversation has become.
And while this debate rages on in intellectual circles, the marketplace has already spoken. The verdict is in. The insane success of films like Animal and Dhurandhar is proof that audiences absolutely do separate a film's craft from its message. They have voted, and they voted with their wallets.
So is there a way for criticism to ever regain that lost trust? Well, the source material suggests a possible solution, the dual-track review. The idea is that critics would give two separate grades. One for the craft, the cinematography, the editing, the sound, the how, and a second separate analysis of the ideological text, the message, the what. This would let a critic praise the filmmaking skill without having to endorse a message they find deeply problematic.
But this all leaves us with one final and kind of unsettling question. The old system, the old gatekeepers, they're clearly losing their power. So in this new, fractured, and chaotic media landscape, who is in charge now?